Nowhere in law did Congress authorize DOT to set fuel economy standards that effectively mandate EVs while at the same time will force the internal combustion engine out of the market. In fact, Mr. Secretary, federal statute expressly prohibits NHTSA from considering the fuel economy of EVs when determining maximum feasible CAFE standards for passenger cars and trucks.
Especially black and brown.
Means to the extent permitted by statute, considering the areas of persistent poverty or other factors that have placed an area at a disadvantage. $17.6 million in grants going to 20 communities in 16 states to support equitable transit-oriented development.
How are you guiding the department in thinking about the LA 28 Olympics?
Train derailment after train derailment should not be the new normal.
I was also happy to read recently that although you are not the stay-at-home parent, you give the twins their bath every night.
Give us an update on the status of the full reopening of the port, what the impact on the economy and supply chain has been, and what your department has done to help the truckers, the shippers, and other industries affected by its closure.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, and thank you for your and this committee's attention to that situation, and certainly was glad to hear that you and other members of the subcommittee will be visiting, will participate in that visit as well as Governor Moore hosts you. The Port of Baltimore is essential to the regional economy, and it plays an important role in the national supply chain as well, especially given its specialization in the transit of vehicles. And then the bridge itself, which provides such a vital connection for people and goods, obviously missing that has a substantial impact. There are about 30,000 vehicles crossing that bridge on a daily basis. We got to work right away as soon as we got those calls in the middle of the night, and have been working with Maryland throughout to try to help them get back to normal.
What is the probable need for supplemental? And if we're going to go to that expense, what would it take to fill that fund with a reasonable amount of money, an endowment in the sense to not have to have a wait for a supplemental when the next disaster takes place?
Well, I'd certainly concur that it would be optimal to know that the fund is being refreshed at a rate that keeps up with the needs that have come to it. Again, if we're using recent years as an index, we would see the last 2 years disbursements would have been between 700 and 800 million, but we know there is even more, and you would want, given the Francis Scott Key Bridge, and you would want some kind of cushion there. So while we have not proposed a specific supplemental at this time, that gives you a sense of the proportion that we think would be needed in order to make sure the ER fund was at a healthy level, and of course would also spare us needing to go to supplementals in the future if we knew that there were adequate balances for the unmet need that was coming in.
No, again, and those details are matter. So again, if making sure the committee knows for the future, what would it take to get the fund at a healthy level to address the needs as they hit, and what would be a normal, appropriate amount to fund that spigot every year? Thank you.
Thank you. So, sorry. Being authorized at $100 million a year and then periodically being supplemented by Congress, we can work with that. But a cushion that's more in the line of the levels that we've found ourselves dispersing in recent years would help us to stay ahead of that and reduce the need for supplementals or additional work outside of the regular budget cycle.
And really talk about the CAFE standards that have recently been announced, that everyone is, I don't want to say, well, I might say up in arms about, because nowhere in law did Congress authorize DOT to set fuel economy standards that effectively mandate EVs while at the same time will force the internal combustion engine out of the market. In fact, Mr. Secretary, federal statute expressly prohibits NHTSA from considering the fuel economy of EVs when determining maximum feasible CAFE standards for passenger cars and trucks. Now, can you give me a little update on the CAFE standards? What are they finally going to boil down to? And how does DOT plan to implement such a massive move to EVs without consumer buy-in, really? Because as we've all seen, so few really want to buy them at this point.
Well, I do think it's important to note that every year more Americans choose EVs than the year before, and very few Americans who choose an EV decide to go back. But I do want to agree and note that, as you correctly stated, NHTSA does not take EVs into account when it's formulating CAFE standards. They're about the quality of an internal combustion engine. The rule that was proposed would require a fleet-wide average of 58 miles per gallon by 2032. I know that seems aggressive, but frankly, every CAFE...
To say the least.
Yeah, but that's exactly what they said when we outrageously suggested that you could get 20 miles a gallon back in the 80s or 90s. So every time we raise the bar, we find that industry is able to meet it. And it's remarkable the innovation that goes on. But ultimately, we believe these are about not just cleaner air, but saving Americans money by having more efficient gas engines. And we know that these gas cars are going to be on the road a long time, even as the EV market share grows, which is part of why we continue to think it's important to meet our statutory responsibility with the CAFE standards.
Can you please discuss the Department of Transportation's ongoing efforts to ensure that members of historically marginalized communities, again, especially Black and Brown, and even women in non-traditional jobs, are being included in the efforts to uplift the America's working class?
Well, thank you. This continues to be a very important consideration for us, and as we advance initiatives like the President's Justice 40 commitment, always, of course, being mindful of the statutory authority behind it. We believe we continue to have extraordinary opportunities to lift up communities that have been passed over, or in some cases even harmed by the transportation decisions of past generations. And we know that when we do that, nobody is made worse off, and a lot of people are better off. In terms of how we can best do that, that has included measures like technical assistance to help communities that aren't wealthy enough to have sometimes the most well-heeled federal relations organizations, for example, still be able to compete and win in our discretionary grant processes. It means, to the extent permitted by statute, considering the areas of persistent poverty or other factors that have placed an area at a disadvantage, and generally ensuring that all community voices are heard in the proposals for projects that are coming forward.
Do you have any plans to grant an exception to livestock haulers for the ELD rules in fiscal year 2025?
Certainly am aware of the unique issues that livestock haulers face when you have living cargo. It's a little bit different than boxes and inanimate objects, and I think that's contemplated in the practices of FMCSA. I'm not aware of any change to the current practice that is forthcoming in terms of some of the flexibilities.
Have you worked with the Department of Housing and Urban Development to ensure that we are coordinating the goal of this pilot program?
Well, thank you. And the short answer on working with HUD is yes. I've spoken with both Acting Secretary Todman and before that Secretary Fudge about this, because we recognize the relationship between housing affordability and transportation options. Specifically with regard to the program, just recently, in fact, earlier this month, FTA announced $17.6 million in grants going to 20 communities in 16 states to support equitable transit-oriented development. And the goal is to, again, try to integrate our thinking about what are the two biggest costs for most households taken together, housing and transportation.
You were in Vegas the other day for the high-speed rail. One comment that you made that stood out to me, because high-speed rail in California, they broke ground in 2015, was that this was going to be the first true high-speed rail. What do you mean by that, and why is California 10 years into this project, construction already started? Why is Las Vegas is going to be done before ours?
Well, Las Vegas is the Las Vegas to Rancho Cucamonga project follows a unique right-of-way, the bulk of which is actually basically shooting down the middle of the median of I-15. It's part of how they were able to establish the project timelines that they were. So my remark, I should, to be very specific, it is not the first true high-speed rail to break ground. What I mean by that is we project be the first high-speed rail to be in service in terms of revenue rise. Their goal is to be in operation by 2028. They've got an eye on the Olympics, and so we're excited that would be happening sooner. The North-South project, which we also believe in, are investing in, but recognize has a much more complex right-of-way picture, is on a longer timeline than the Bright Line West project.
How are you guiding the department in thinking about the LA 28 Olympics?
Well, thank you for the question. And as you note, the Olympic Games are just a massive undertaking that requires a lot of forward thinking about how to move people around efficiently and safely. DOT, in particular, our Federal Transit Administration, have been working with the Olympic Organizing Committee, LA 28, since early 2023. Just had a conversation the other day, most recently with that committee, myself. And I should note there's an intergovernmental working group that's been set up by the White House to try to make sure that transportation, security, and other needs faced by the organizers are well coordinated on the federal side. We've had DOT staff tour the expected venues, housing, and transportation projects recently, and are committed to working with the LA region to make these the best Olympic and Paralympic Games in American history. A couple things of note: they have declared their intention to expand transit in the region to meet the needs for these games. So they are establishing a Games bus route network to provide the ability to reach relevant destinations and hubs. There's also the supplemental bus system, or SBS, concept. We'll continue to work with LA to address the challenges that come with that, basically mobilizing vehicles borrowed from other jurisdictions.
Now, when it comes to road transportation, Interstate 81 it has been overburdened by truck traffic for decades now. Originally built for around 15% truck traffic, it accommodates over 30, 40, sometimes even 50% truck traffic, depending on the day of the week, traveling up to the northeast from points south. But and while we are working to add a third lane, and would appreciate your cooperation with that, traffic fatalities are up on 81. NHTSA estimated that nearly 41,000 people died in traffic crashes nationwide in 2023. What are NHTSA's plans to reduce fatalities impacted by crashes? Is widening one of those ways that you all are seeking to reduce crashes? And can you speak to the department's support for adding that third lane to 81?
Thanks. NHTSA is very focused on reversing the rise in roadway deaths that we've experienced in recent years. The data are suggesting we have finally come off the peak, but am certainly not satisfied with the current level of roadway death in this country. About 40,000 people, which means roughly the equivalent of a fully loaded airliner every single day. And a number that I should also add is significantly higher than our peer developed countries. Our strategy for addressing that has 5 elements: safer roads, safer vehicles, safer speeds, safer people, including drivers, and then a higher standard of post-crash care.
And that first thing that you mentioned, safer roads, wouldn't adding additional lanes, mileage, be part of that?
Potentially, yes. It certainly depends on the project and the specifics, but we want to make sure that there's a healthy and safe flow of traffic on any interstate.
As you know, the Department of State and the government of the Dominican Republic are in final talks for a long-anticipated modern U.S.-DR open skies agreement. The cost of flying back home for many of these families is exuberant. When they go visit their families back home, sometimes they have to pay $1,500 to $2,000. So a family of 4 is going to have a difficult time going back home. And I want to know, given the evolving dynamics of international air travel, what strategies are in place to ensure the effective implementation of the modernized U.S.-DR Open Skies Agreement?
Thank you. I know how important this is, especially to Dominican communities in the U.S. and to the Dominican Republic, and have had direct conversations with my counterparts from the Dominican Republic about the importance of this. Our department and our interagency partners at State and Commerce are all participating in these negotiations. We've been negotiating for some time. We're very encouraged by recent progress, though we're not there quite yet.
Train derailment after train derailment should not be the new normal. In America, our transportation safety standards should be the gold standard, but the American people are rightfully beginning to lose faith in that standard when they see incidents like this one in Arizona putting their communities at risk. What are you specifically changing within your department to ensure something like this never happens again?
Well, thank you for the question. I passionately agree that there needs to be more done to secure rail safety and to prevent derailments and other accidents. In regards to this particular incident, that day I was in touch with the leadership of the Navajo Nation as well as Arizona and New Mexico. Our FRA administrator was on site yesterday and will continue to engage. That stretch of I-40 is back open, but there continue, of course, to be effects due to that derailment and that fire. Within the department, we've taken a number of steps, some of which we were working on from day one, others accelerated in the wake of the East Palestine, Ohio derailment. That's included focused inspection programs, including a focused review of the phase-in of robust tank cars that can handle the transportation of hazardous materials, as well as a route assessment for high-hazard flammable trains. Railroad by railroad, we've been conducting safety assessments and acting on the findings of those assessments. And I'm pleased to note that just a couple of days ago, we welcomed a new partner to our C3RS, or Confidential Close Call Reporting System, as BNSF agreed to join that pilot following the lead of Norfolk Southern.
Secretary Buttigieg, it's great to see you again. I want to take a moment to thank you on behalf of the father and father-to-be in my office for taking parental leave not long after you and Chasen adopted your 2 kids as newborns. Even though you didn't take anything close to the 12 weeks that your staff would, it was still a great example to set. I was also happy to read recently that although you are not the stay-at-home parent, you give the twins their bath every night. I'm intrigued that you composed a bath time song. My husband was a stay-at-home dad when our kids were young, and when they were toddlers, bath time was my special time with them. I'm not creative enough to compose my own song, but my bath time selection was I Like You by Ernie and Bert from Sesame Street, and yes, I sang both parts. If you're ever looking for another bath time song, I highly recommend it. I also want to thank you for the recent alternative PNT RFP that DOT released. We've spoken about this critical vulnerability several times before, and I'm excited to see things moving forward to address it thanks to you and the department's leadership. It's an exciting time to be a passenger rail supporter in Virginia. At the end of the last year, and in large part thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, 2 major awards were announced through the Federal-State Partnership Program, for the expansion of Long Bridge, and for high-speed rail service between Richmond and Raleigh. The FRA also awarded 2 grants to extend the DC to Roanoke Amtrak line to Bristol and establish daily Cardinal line service, which travels right through my district in Manassas. Just yesterday, it was announced that Amtrak Virginia had its highest ridership ever this past March, with over 123,000 passengers. As you know, Union Station is the second busiest rail station in the country. We are all aware that it has significant infrastructure needs, yet it is getting no direct funding from the infrastructure law. I was glad to see the environmental impact statement and record of decision in March, but that's just one step towards the much-needed expansion project. We all want to maximize the investments in Virginia that I mentioned, as well as all the work that's being done in the Northeast Corridor, but we won't be able to if Union Station remains a bottleneck. My question for you is, how can DOT, FRA, our regional delegation, and other important partners like Amtrak work together to identify funding solutions for this critical project?
Thank you for the question. First, let me just note my admiration for the courage and spirit that you have shown in confronting your diagnosis and continuing to be an effective leader here in Congress, and for your kind words about my family. With regard to Union Station, we recognize its importance really as not just a regional but a national transportation center. And while we're glad that the President's budget proposes to reserve a $15 million set-aside for immediate state-of-good repair projects, as you are well aware, the ultimate needs at Union Station are at another order of magnitude. The completion of the EIS is certainly an important step. And I've been in dialogue with the District of Columbia and other stakeholders about how to best position Union Station for long-term success. That's going to include working to make sure that they are not just on top of addressing some end-of-life station infrastructure, but really preparing the vision for what the future can look like in ways that would qualify for discretionary funds. And of course, we'd welcome opportunities to work with appropriators on any source of funding that could help get that done.
Since then, the department has distributed more than $2 billion to port authorities, tribal, state, and local governments and private companies. While 72% of those funds have gone to the West and East Coast, only 8% of those funds have gone to the Great Lakes ports over the last 5 years. I'm concerned that these funds are not being distributed in a regionally equitable manner. Given the concerning disparity, what should we in the Great Lakes region be telling our local communities?
Well, as you know, Representative, I'm myself a creature of the Great Lakes. I grew up in Indiana, live in Michigan, met my spouse in Chicago soon after he'd returned from Milwaukee, and I know how important those facilities are. I will say that while the dollar amounts can vary on our grants, especially when you consider the different size ports that we support, the Great Lakes ports characteristically have been punching above their weight, not just in the value they add to the American economy, but also in the last couple of rounds of the PIDP program. Now, that of course doesn't mean that every application was successful, but what I will say is that we recognize that America's supply chains and the importance of our ports isn't just about the well-publicized matter of the large container ships that are bearing down often on ports like LA and Long Beach, but the traffic that goes on, often bulk traffic that traverses the Great Lakes, and that we also, of course, support through our management of the U.S. side of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway, which links those to the Atlantic. And we're certainly happy to provide debriefs to any port that was hopeful of a grant recently is going to try to come back for another round. Again, noting that these ports have really demonstrated their often small but mighty character, both in our programs and just in their contributions to U.S. shipping.
Now, based on projects selected for FY25 in the annual report, FDA is slating over $20 billion in commitments via grant agreements, many of which are expecting hundreds of millions in payments each year from the THUD bill. IIJA provides $1.6 billion in advance appropriations, but the well runs dry in 26. So quickly, what is your response to the concern that this $20 billion projected level of commitment over the next decade might create a check that we can't cash?
In brief, we are working to make sure that we support as many worthy transit projects as we can with the funding that we have. As you note, there is a long list of projects that have met the statutory criteria to get a full funding grant agreement or to go into engineering. The 25 budget request $2.4 billion combined with that 1.6 that came through the infrastructure law that gets us to about $4 billion to meet those current and future needs. Just in terms of how that breaks out, that's about $1 billion for 4 existing new starts, $2.1 billion for 6 new starts projects not yet under construction grants, and then funding for new starts projects that might become ready for construction funding in 25, core capacity projects that might be ready in 25, and then $533 million for 4 projects that come under our small starts project.
That this hearing stands adjourned.